Hello everyone, and welcome to Poetry, Tea and Chat with me, Peter, from Wiltshire Libraries. I'm very pleased you can join us for this edition of our poetry podcast from Wiltshire Libraries, Poetry, Tea and Chat. I've got my cup of tea here, not in my favourite stripy mug today. I'm broadcasting this live from Devizes Library. You may have noticed I'm not in my usual poetry cave either. So this edition is going out in September, late September, and it's the week before National Poetry Day, which is on the first Thursday of October every year. So this year it's on Thursday the 5th of October. So I was looking for some inspiration for some things to read today. And first of all, I turned to one of my go-to books for any kind of poetry, and that is one of the McMorland series of anthologies of poems for every day of the year. A particular favourite of mine is a nature poem for every night of the year. Here it is. Excellent anthology of poetry, and so I was just looking for I love anything to do with nature and the natural world, so I was looking for any kind of poems with a sort of natural theme for sort of suitable for September and October. So that's where some of the poems for today have come from. And then the other thing was I was having a look at, as I mentioned, it is National Poetry Day in the UK on the 5th of October. And so I was looking at their theme for this year, which is refuge, as in refuge for people who have had to move, so sort of like migration, but also people looking for sanctuary in places. So I've got some poems from this year's theme as well, and from the website, which I do recommend for the National Poetry Day. If you just go to your chosen search engine and go to their website, which is, he says, looking for the URL, I think it's just nationalpoetryday.co.uk, but if you just put in National Poetry Day on a search engine, it'll come up. There are some fantastic things there. It's a really good event every year, and there's some really good poems there. It's nationalpoetryday.co.uk. Okay, and there's some great resources and some great poems there. So actually what I was going to do first of all is give a book recommendation. This is a book called Weeds. It's by Richard Mabey, who has written lots and lots of books on plants and nature. He wrote a book years ago called Food for Free, which is great at this time of year because you can go out and find things like sloes for making into sloe gin or sloe jam, or any other things. And he wrote a brilliant book, a huge sort of social history of plants called Flora Botanica, which is great. Both of those books are available from Wiltshire Libraries, as is Weeds, the story of outlaw plants, which also on the title page has a further subtitle, How Vagabond Plants Gatecrashed Civilization and Changed the Way We Think About Nature. How about that? It's a great book. Again, it's just looking at plants, and particularly plants that are often classed as weeds, and the sort of cultural significance of them. Some people say that a weed is just a plant in a place we don't want it. But yeah, they tend to be the most adaptable of plants. And I kind of thought, well, that kind of ties in with the theme of sanctuary and refuge. In that weeds are often the plants that find a refuge and a sanctuary in unusual places. The first poem I'm going to read is by one of my favourite poets, which is the writer D.H. Lawrence, and this poem is called Barvarian Gentians, which I had to look up. It's an alpine flower, and it grows up in high mountains in the Alps. And it's a sort of beautiful, sort of like dark blue flower. And this poem has lots and lots of imagery that is very suitable for this time of year, particularly as the sort of nights are just beginning to draw in. And again, that sort of makes me think of sort of like when it's dark and wanting to find refuge and sanctuary, preferably next to a wood burner somewhere with a good cup of tea. So this is Barvarian Gentians by D.H. Lawrence. Not every man has gentians in his house in soft September, at slow, sad Michaelmas. Bavarian gentians, big and dark, only dark, darkening the daytime, torchlight, with the smoking blueness of Pluto's gloom. Ribbed and torch-like, with their blaze of darkness, spread blue, down flattening into points, flattened under the sweep of white day. Torch flower of the blue smoking darkness, Pluto's dark blue days. Black lamps from the halls of Dis, burning dark blue, giving off darkness, blue darkness, as Demeter's pale lamps give off light. Lead me then, lead me the way. Reach me a gentian, give me a torch. Let me guide myself with the blue forked torch of a flower, down the darker and darker stairs, where blue is darkened on blueness. Even where Persephone goes, just now, from the frosted September, to the sightless realm where darkness is awake upon the dark, and Persephone herself is but a voice, or a darkness invisible, enfolded in the deeper dark of the arms plutonic and pierced with the passion of dense gloom, among the splendour of torches of darkness, shedding darkness on the lost bride and her groom. That was Barvarian Gentians by D.H. Lawrence. I wonder how many times the word darkness or dark is mentioned in that poem. He definitely goes in for repeating it as a form of alliteration, but also to just really heighten that imagery. Also, Pluto and blue seem to crop up a lot. Sometime I'm going to count up how many times those words are mentioned in that poem. But I just thought, I mean, obviously there's the reference of September there, which is when this edition is being recorded. But I thought it was a nice opening one. And as I say, I really like the poetry of D.H. Lawrence, the writer, famous obviously for his novels, but I really like his poetry. Obviously, any books that I mention or poems that I mention in this episode, I will put up in the chat afterwards so that you can see what was mentioned. So, what should we have next? I think I'm going to do a bit of Shakespeare. So this is an extract from King Lear. And it's when King Lear has disappeared off, he's gone mad and has disappeared off wearing a crown of weeds that he's found. So I thought this tied in with things, and his daughter Cordelia is asking for people to go and find him. So this is from Act 4, Scene 4 of King Lear. And Cordelia is speaking. Alack, 'tis he! Why, he was met even now, as mad as the vexed sea, singing aloud, crowned with rank fermenter and furrow weeds, with hard oaks, hemlock, nettles, cuckoo flowers, darnel, and all the idle weeds that grow in our sustaining corn. A century send forth, search every acre in the high-grown field, and bring him to our eye. What can man's wisdom in the restoring his bereaved sense? He that helps him take all my outward worth. So I just thought that tied in with our theme of refuge and sanctuary. King Lear has gone for sanctuary in the natural world in a disturbed state, wearing a crown of weeds that he's picked and put onto his head. There's always some interesting references to nature and plants in Shakespeare, our most famous writer. Right, what was I going to do next? Oh, another book recommendation. Okay, so this one has an interest to anyone who is familiar with some of the sites around Wiltshire that's mentioned in it. It's called The Stonemason, A History of Building Britain, and it's by Andrew Ziminski. Let's see if I can hold that up so you can see it. It's a fantastic book. You can see a picture of a stone carving that the author did himself of his own dog with some plants. I'm afraid I can't identify which plants are on the front. But yeah, he's a stonemason of many years' experience. He's worked on Salisbury Cathedral. He's worked on the Anglo-Saxon chapel at Bradford and Avon. He's even done some work on the stonework at West Kennet Longbarrow. So many sites all over Wiltshire are mentioned in it, and other places in the country that he's worked, but it's got that local aspect if you know those places. And it's again a really, really interesting book where he just talks about the craft of stonemasonry and what you can learn about people and the places that they lived and took sanctuary, particularly buildings that have a sort of like religious connection to them. So that's The Stonemason, A History of Building Britain by Andrew Ziminski. So as I was saying earlier, National Poetry Day is on Thursday the 5th of October, and this year's theme is refuge. And what they have put out about this year's theme is it encourages everyone to make, experience and share poetry with family and friends. And each year the idea of National Poetry Day is to come together because voices, words and stories help to bridge understanding in our community. And there's a number of poems on the website, nationalpoetryday.co.uk, where the poets have given permission for their work to be shared. Which is very good because it means that I can read some more recent poems. Often we're limited with copyright rules, which we are very keen to uphold as librarians, which means that we don't normally read poems by anyone who is not already past 70 years dead. But I can read some more recent poems because their poets have given permission for use in terms of National Poetry Day. And the first one is by one of our most valued and treasured poets alive today, Michael Rosen, and it's called On the Move Again from Somewhere. This is On the Move Again from Somewhere by Michael Rosen. You know, you gotta go. No time to grieve, you've just gotta leave. Get away from the pain, on the move again. Take the train, catch a plane. Make the trip in a ship, take a hike, ride a bike. Go by car, going far. Use your feet on the street, get stuck in a truck. When you arrive and you're alive, you arrive, you're alive. What you leave behind won't leave your mind, but home is where you find it. 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 That's the poem On the Move Again from Somewhere by Michael Rosen. And that's available in a book called On the Move, Poems About Migration, that's co-authored by Michael Rosen and Quentin Blake. So, as I say, all the poems for this year's National Poetry Day have a theme tie-in with the theme of refuge that looks at often migration. And there's a poem in there called Hope on the website, which is also by a poet writing about tales of migration. Particularly, she was looking at children who had migrated to the UK, often because of conflict in their homelands. This poem, Hope, by Nicola Davies, is one such poem, and I found it very moving, but ultimately uplifting. But the last time that I read this, I choked up. So I hope I'm going to get through this one. Hope by Nicola Davies. A bomb took his brother. A sniper's bullet took his dad. And when you asked about his mum and sister, he just looked away. So when his was the only flower, sunflower, that didn't come up, I thought, geez, the universe really doesn't like this kid. I didn't blame him when he threw the pot against the wall. But in the middle of the muddy impact zone, there was a speck of green, a minute, fragile finger poking from that skinny, stripy, little seed. He picked it up, refilled the pot, replanted it with such tenderness, then for the first time smiled. I had to turn away to hide the tears, as a tiny shoot of hope stirred inside me too. I love that last line. As a tiny shoot of hope stirred inside me too. So that was Hope by Nicola Davies, and that's from a book that she has written called Choose Love, with illustrations by the Czech illustrator Petr Horacek. And that's just a year old, and it's got poems all the way through by the poet Nicola Davies about real experiences that she's had working with children from migrant families that have moved to the UK to seek sanctuary and refuge from conflict in their own homes. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. I hope you enjoyed those few poems and a couple of book recommendations and the reading from Shakespeare. I hope that you enjoy poetry in your life and find the time to just take some time with hopefully a good cup of tea and have enjoyed our Poetry and Chat podcast from Wiltshire Libraries today. Thanks very much.